Welcome to Australian Hiker, your online hiking resource. We're your hosts, Tim and Jill Savage.
This is episode 118 of the Australian Hiker podcast, and this week's episode's titled Zen and the Art of Hiking. Now, there are a number of different reasons why people enjoy hiking. The flora and fauna, the majestic views, the little stuff, the big stuff, and while there might be some common themes that we all tend to enjoy, there's always some unique reasons for each of us which are likely to be different from each other. In episode 10 of this podcast, we provided a broad overview of some of these reasons. And in this week's episode, we're going to look at some of the more spiritual reasons, for want of a better phrase, behind why we hike. We hope you enjoy. Over the last couple of years, I've had cause to think about why or what it is about hiking that I actually like. And this has been prompted for a number of reasons. One, it's because I have plenty of time to think and like to think about these things. But it's also been prompted by people making comment on blog posts that we've done, particularly on some of the longer trips, about the speed at which we travel. Now, there's a well-known saying that people would be familiar with, and that's it's about the journey, not the destination. And this highlights it's not where you're going, but it's a matter of how you're getting there, what you're learning in the journey itself, building memories, and as part of this, the destination or the end point is just one small component of a particular hike.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, isn't it, when people find out what you do for leisure. And, I've gotten into the habit because I think sometimes when people don't have a point of reference around hiking, I've got into the habit of saying it feels good when I stop. That kind of, that resonates with them a little bit because sometimes, when they haven't thought about hiking and they certainly haven't thought about hiking over multiple days or multiple weeks, there's no point of reference. So it's a really hard conversation to have with people.
And I think it's particularly the case when you are, as Jill said, talking about the multi-week hikes. I think people can cope with trips like the overland track, where you're talking about a 5, 6, 7 day sort of hike, and hikes of that sort of distance. But when you start hiking for 1, 2, 3, 400 kilometres, 1,000 kilometres. People.
That's just nuts, Tim.
Yeah, and that's the general response that you tend to get. And certainly it's the response we've had from some of our family members. And when we do talk about our longer hikes, we've got an upcoming trip in 2.5 to 3 weeks' time on the Human Hovel Track, which is around about 425, 430 kilometres. And one of the comments that people tend to make is you're walking down the Hume Highway, which is the highway that's actually named after the explorer, which just happens to be in the general vicinity. So people tend to have no concept about what we're doing or the fact that you can actually hike for these sort of distances. So, as I said, it gave me cause to think about what it is that I actually get out of hiking. And this is not just talking about the physical fitness or looking at the scenery. It's about probably, and as I said, there really is only one phrase I can use here, the spiritual reasons about why we actually hike. So we looked at this from a he said, she said point of view. So I'll throw in my 2 cents worth and let Jill have her say and see how we come up.
I'll put my dollar's worth in after that.
So for me, there's 2 types of hiking that I do. The first is when I hike in a group, and typically it's a group of 2, and that's normally with Jill. And the second is solo hiking. And these are 2 very different types of hiking, regardless of the distance. With 2 very different types of experiences that they generate. So talking about hiking as a couple or hiking as more than one person, when I hike with Jill, it can be just short hikes. It can be single days or multi-day or even multi-week hikes that we talk about spending time together. When we are hiking together, my style of hiking tends to change quite differently. I tend to think about what it is, or I tend to think about Jill's comfort and enjoyment.
Oh, really? Sorry, I must have missed that.
I tend to think about what it is that she likes, and if I find things, I'll always be looking for things not just for my own sake, but finding things to show her as well. And
I think we tend to do that for each other as well. When I read your version of the he said, I just thought, oh well, that was very sweet. But it's actually quite true that you do kind of go, oh, look at that, and then you both peer into something and you go, oh, that's interesting, and then you walk on. But otherwise, you would have just taken it in yourself and then moved on without commenting to anyone else.
That's usually the case. The other thing with sharing a hike with, whether it's your partner or your significant other or just a friend, it's the sort of thing you can go back to and talk about days, weeks, months, or even years later. So, we still talk about trips we did 10 to 15 years ago. We have, every so often we'll drag the photo albums out and have a look at them with the photos, and we can actually talk about it, and there's a common frame of reference to the reasons we were there, and it's a shared experience. I think the thing is with the longer hikes as well, you get to connect in a deeper way with your partner that modern life tends not to allow. So one of the comments we had made after our Larapinta Trail hike in 2016, Jill went to work and one of her co-workers said, what do you talk about with your husband for 2 odd weeks on the trail? And it really did surprise us. That people have the inability to spend 2 weeks with somebody, particularly the person that happens to be their partner, pretty much 24 hours a day.
Apparently you run out of things to say. That'd never happen.
And I thought about this in relation to our modern lifestyles, that, quite often these days that a lot of couples tend to have both partners working, or even if one partner's staying at home and the other one's working, there's large periods of the day where you're not actually interacting with each other. You come home, you have your meals, you might watch a bit of telly or go out or do something, and then you go to bed. So as it is, really you're not actually spending a lot of time interacting with each other.
Well, I think what you do is that you save up a whole lot of transactional things. Oh, I must tell, hubby about X, and I must say this, and I must say that, and I must say something else. And I don't think people realise it, but they're not getting into conversations around a broader range of things that may or may not matter, but they're different and they're actually quite deep and significant sometimes.
And even to the point of view when they're not, when you just ramble and chat.
You ramble.
So, certainly when we go on 2-3 week hikes, we don't spend the entire 24 hours talking. We have periods during the day where we don't talk at all. We have periods of the day where we do. And there's nothing wrong with having a bit of silence, even though we might be walking with each other. So we don't necessarily have to talk to each other 24 hours. But just being with each other and being able to share that experience is something that's actually quite good. The other thing I'd say, and again, this comes back to, we have talked about hiking as a couple in the past, but hiking with somebody else, and again, it can be a friend without necessarily being your significant other, is every hiker will have, on a longer trip, they'll have bad days, for want of a better term. Days when you're just not feeling right, you might be 100%, you might have blisters, it might be raining, and you're just not having a good time. Having someone to share that with, but also having someone who may not be in a poor mood that you are to lift your spirits a bit. And I know when we go hiking, it's rare. And in fact, I can't even think of a time where we've both had a bad day on the same time. It's usually one of us will have a poor day, the other one's there sort of trying to G them up.
Annoyingly positive and upbeat, and then you flip. It's the other person's turn.
So it's the sort of thing that having that second person there, that's a bit of a byproduct, I suppose, of having someone there to help you along and push you along a bit. So we talked about, from my perspective, whether is this about the journey or is it about the destination? And certainly when I'm hiking as a couple or as hiking with somebody else, it is about the journey for me. I'm thinking about what we're seeing. The destination certainly is there, but it just becomes a small part of why we're actually hiking. Now to flip that, the other type of hiking that people would be aware that I like is solo hiking. Sometimes it's just a short 5 or 6 kilometre hike. It might be that Jill's busy on the weekends when we generally go out and do hikes, and I'll go out and just hike by myself on a short hike.
Or it might be that we have to do the car swap and I have to spend, 5 kilometres walking uphill while you get to walk 5 kilometres downhill from the other end. Yes, it has happened.
But I think from a point of view of perspective of solo hiking, I have a very different experience and a different reason for solo hiking. And it tends to be almost a complete 360-degree flip on what I actually get out of the hikes when I'm hiking with Jill as a couple. With my solo experiences, particularly on the longer hikes, I think I end up getting as I said, it almost becomes a spiritual moment for me. And from my perspective, I do go into autopilot mode. Now, what this means is that I'll go through, and not that I'm not looking after my safety. I'm looking where I'm going. I'm looking where I'm putting my feet, particularly if snakes are, it's snake season. There's likely to be snakes around. I'll be paying very close attention to that. I'm looking to make sure I'm not going off trail and I'm navigating the way I'm supposed to be. But I've got the ability to do that with just a small component of my brain. And then with the rest of it, just...
Sorry.
Yeah. But I suppose with the rest of it, I tend to just switch off and tune out and go into my own head and think deep thoughts. And there's this is a figure I'd looked at before, that depending on which figure you look at, the average human will think somewhere between 12,000 and 60,000 thoughts a day. Some of these might be just I must get bread on the way home. Others might be, what am I going to have for lunch? Or what do I need to tell my partner at the end of the day? And all those sort of things add up. 12,000 definitely is the lower figure you'll tend to find around the place. But that's a lot of thoughts. And I think, again, it's the sort of thing that you're doing this on a day-to-day basis without actually interacting with what's going on, because you've got work, you've got other things that are distracting you, you're watching TV, you're not actually interacting with those thoughts, they're just happening.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because now you can see how easy it would be to keep a conversation going for 2 weeks, because those 12,000 thoughts, if you're saying it's at the bottom end, mostly you're not sharing those with anybody.
No. So there is certainly plenty of things to think about and talk about. So as I said, I find particularly on my longer distance hikes, I'll go through, and I found this has been the case on a couple of occasions where I tend to go through a particular cycle of, I'm thinking about, okay, look, I've just finished work and I don't have to go back to work for a few weeks. And then I'm thinking about, okay, what do I need to do at home? And how's my job going? And, well, what am I doing next week, sort of thing. And I go through a cycle of thinking all these thoughts. And I tend to get into the really deep and meaningful stuff about why am I here and where am I going with my life. And it is a pattern I tend to repeat on these sort of things, and certainly from last year from my Bibbulmun track hike, it really does make you think about what is going on and what you're actually doing.
I think it's about what's important, and I think it's about what you value. And sometimes that can be a bit confronting for people because what's around them and what they thought they valued might not actually be real.
Yeah, and that was probably the biggest thing I got out of last year's trip. 5 weeks pretty much by myself. There were periods where I was talking to people. But, if I look at 35 days of hiking, I was probably lucky to talk to people in shops, people on the trail. It would have probably been added, if you added it up to the amount of time, probably 8 hours over that 5-week period. The rest of the time I was by myself in my own head and thinking about what is it that's important to me. And I came away from that trip thinking about those sort of things. And if you read a lot of blogs coming out of the US about the Appalachian Trail and the Pacific Crest Trail, and there's a standard comment that through hiking wrecks your life because it makes you think about things you typically don't think about in your normal day-to-day life. I know there have been people I've talked to over the last month or so that have started long hikes and withdrawn. And I think it's one of those sort of things that solo hiking is not for everyone. And spending that amount of time by yourself in your own head is a very confronting sort of thing that people typically don't do. We tend to be social animals. We typically don't spend long periods by ourselves without interacting. So if you're thinking about doing a long distance hike by yourself, I would recommend doing a 3 or a 4 or a 5 day trip just to see how you go with it, because it is a very different creature to hiking with another person or hiking with a group.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting thing because for me, hiking is about sharing. It's about discovery and exploring, but it's primarily about sharing. So you can discover and you can explore when you're solo hiking, but you're not able to share that with anybody in the moment. It's sort of, when we're hiking, there are these moments that pass when you see something or you try to point something out and Tim might miss it. You're just not there in the minute. And it's a bit like, well, there's no point explaining it because you needed to be there. It doesn't quite work if you don't see it too.
And I think that was the thing with me with that Bibbulmun track trip from last year. For me, the hike was, I thoroughly enjoyed myself. I did have people comment on the blog that I was moving so quickly, how could I be possibly enjoying it? But I was. And again, it wasn't that I didn't enjoy the landscape that I was in. I was just enjoying different aspects that people may not have thought about. And I think for me on that trip, it really was about the destination. I had a goal in mind that I wanted to complete the trip. I had a time frame to work with that I knew I was comfortable with completing. And while as Jill said, I can't really go back and share that with her. But having said that, when she came over and met me after the trip, we went out and did a short section of the track just to show that this is what one of the shelters was like and this is what the track was like, just to give her some frame of reference. But otherwise, there's, apart from around about 995 kilometres of the track that she didn't share with me. And
I did feel really bad that, I wasn't standing at the end with the cheer squad at that last trailhead. It was just like, oh, that would have been terrible for you to pop out of the bush and to check out the Coles supermarket car park across the road, and it's done.
And it was, if you watch the posts on Facebook from when I finished that trip, I was very emotional, and it was almost a bit of an anticlimax. It's like, this is my life for 5 weeks. What do I do now? And it was like, okay, I've got another week before I go back to work. But it was one of those things where you've achieved a big milestone, a big destination. And as I said, for me, it really was about the destination as much as I enjoyed the track itself.
Yeah. So for me, it is about a combination of things, and I do focus on the journey, and I do focus on what's happening in that moment, and that's why I like hiking with Tim, because I can share that. And I've said, just previously that the moment passes and it doesn't make sense to share it when it passes. Sometimes they're quite small and quite insignificant in the scheme of things. And then to tell a story about this really, really small, silly thing probably isn't quite the same. So for me, it is about being in the moment and about exploring and discovering and just absorbing. I do like to absorb the feel of the environment. And that's good when things are going well. When things are not so well, I would then tend to focus a little bit on the next milestone, the next camp, the next kind of break. And there are a whole range of reasons why things might not go so well. Sometimes when there's a tough part of the trail, or you're just not feeling up to it, and you've got to keep going. And so I've discovered that I'm a midpoint person. I'm a hump day person. Once I get over the hump day, I am much more about the journey. The first part of a hike, the first half, it's a combination of the journey and the destination. And I play from, pivot from one point to another and a whole bunch of different things in between. And Tim knows all too well when it's, not a good day. I might even swear a little bit. There's definitely a look he gets that says this is not a good day, and I'm focusing on the next destination or the next break or the next campsite or whatever it might be, just to get through.
So from Jill's perspective, Jill's not really into solo hiking.
No, I'm not. I know that. I'm not. And I think it is because I do see things, and I want to share those things, and I want to talk about those things. And when they're past, and sometimes there's this sort of, second in time, and when they're past, it's gone.
To wrap all this up, I suppose we introduced this about, we talked about Zen and the art of hiking, and it really, as we said, for us is it about the journey or is it about the destination? There's no right answer here. It may be that for an individual, that one hike is about the journey and the next day it's about the destination. It may be that you have a particular style of hiking and you really don't care what you're seeing. You're just focused on walking in the distances and thinking, and you just happen to be in a really nice environment to do it in. So there is no right and wrong answer through here. So I think the next time you're out exploring, get in touch with how you like to experience the outdoors, and if that's what you're into, surround yourself with like-minded people. And as I said, for me, I'm not a group hiker, and there's a number of reasons for that. I prefer to hike either solo or with Jill. I tend to, and it's just who I am, I just tend to feel like when I'm in a big group, whether I'm leading a hike or not, I just feel responsible.
And I think it goes a bit beyond your style as well. So Lucy Barnard recently posted something on Facebook about how a friend came to hike with her. So if you check out Tangles and Tail, there's an interesting video, and she's very frank about it, because she's in a rhythm now. So, you might recall that she's walking from the bottom of South America through to the Arctic Circle.
Pretty much at the top of North America. So we pretty much I don't think it's quite getting to the Arctic Circle, but it's getting pretty close. Yeah.
Pretty close. So she's in a rhythm now of how she does that, how she gets organised, how she, the distances she travels, what she looks at, what she focuses on, and all of that sort of stuff. And she's talking about how a friend came to support her and came to walk with her, and she found it really, really difficult. She says partly because she was a bit bossy. I think it's because she's found her rhythm and she's found her style, and somebody else coming into that space, didn't match. They hadn't had the distance, they hadn't had the experiences. So, if they were going to continue on walking together, that other person would have needed to modify their style, and Lucy also would have needed to modify her style. So they would make it work. And I think that's a really important thing that perhaps we don't really think about. And when you're hiking with somebody that you know well, and you've done quite a lot of hiking with them, you take a bit of this stuff for granted, I think, as well. And it just works. But when you're hiking with someone new, you really do need to think about your style, their style, what's important for you, what's important for them. And it's not that you have to compromise or trade anything off. You just need to be clear of what's important and get that too.
Okay, so I hope this has provided a bit of an overview about reasons for hiking that are more in the spiritual realm rather than I like looking at the pretty flowers or the wildlife.
But that's part of the spiritual part too, Tim.
It is. So we haven't actually done hiking news for a while, and there was a couple of things that have come up over the last couple of months that I thought were quite interesting that I would actually talk about. And I'll put some links to these things in the show notes because they're quite interesting. And there was one I came across earlier today, and it was only from the weekend just gone. And this was on one of the news online news services, and this is out of the United States. And the title of it was "Woman's Fake Instagram Hiking Photo Goes Viral After Her Sister Exposes Her." And there's this lovely photo or a couple of photos of this young, attractive female. She's got a bottle of water. She looks like she's about to go walking on a track. And she had a friend or a boyfriend filming her. And then in the background, her sister's filming her from what actually turns out to be her backyard. And her sister's doing all this filming right on the edge of their yard. And she wasn't really going hiking. She was just posting photos to look like she was going hiking.
Well, that's okay.
That's okay. Yeah. So
as long as we know.
So I think that's the thing. I mean, you see some really amazing photos on social media, and in most cases they are natural photos. Some cases they are very staged. And in this case here, this was a very staged photo to say, hey, I'm just going on a hike, when all she was doing was posing in the backyard.
Must be a pretty impressive backyard, though.
Well, it was. It looked pretty good. But, as we said, the tweet went viral. It's received 275,000 likes and 40,000 retweets, which is pretty amazing, as her sister dobs in her sibling to say, look, my sister's faking this. It's not real. And I think that's the thing with Instagram. Instagram has had some changes over the last month in Australia. The likes have now been removed, so you can't tell how popular an Instagram image is unless you happen to be the owner of that site. So you're not posting photos to see if you can get the maximum number of likes because no one's really going to notice. The other news item that's worthwhile mentioning, which we did talk about in our email newsletter, which we send out once a month, was the number of people who got caught out in a recent period of snow in Tasmania. Now, if you have hiked the overland track or a number of other hikes within Tasmania, you may or may not be aware that snow is possible pretty much 12 months of the year. There's, if you're in an inland mountainous sort of hike, snow is a real potential. So this time of the year, when you're going hiking on the overland track in June or early July, you really should expect snow. It's something that does happen. And there were people who got caught out doing the overland track. Now, in all fairness, some of them did say they expected snow and were prepared for snow, but the snow was so heavy and
extreme,
they weren't prepared for that. And I have had friends who have hiked the overland track in wintertime before and been snowed into a cabin for 3 days and having to wade out in waist-depth snow because they weren't going to have enough food to last them. So it's the sort of thing that you really do need to be aware of what the extremes can be, and however unlikely it is that they're going to occur, you do need to plan for them.
We've had a pretty severe winter in Australia, and snow just recently up and down the east coast of Australia, including in Queensland for, who would have thought that? But anyway, I guess it happens every now and then.
So, yeah, it's the sort of thing that it's not that common that people do get caught out, but it does happen and can happen, and you do need to plan for that if you are looking at doing what is classed as an out-of-season hike. All kudos goes to the search and rescue people who managed to get all these people out.
And Tassie Police, they do a big job too.
And they do a really good job, but that is resources that are tied up doing these sort of things. And we were just lucky in this circumstance where people did survive, where there could have been some fatalities, had they had not done the basic planning and let people know where they were going. So, again, it is something to consider when you are going for these hikes where the conditions can turn very sour on you very quickly. Okay, we hope you've enjoyed this episode. We have a couple of episodes coming up just prior to we start our human hovel track hike. The order I'm not quite sure of. I have an interview that I'm recording over the next 4 to 5 days, which may end up being next week's.
It's all a bit of a mystery at this minute.
It is. And then I have another one, which I know what the topic is. I'll see how it's going when I record this interview. I've got some really good interviews lined up over the next few months, but it's just a matter of when I can get to talk to people and when people have access to phones and also data signal to be able to record interviews online. So keep an eye out for those. As always, you can listen to this episode on the Australian Hiker website at www.australianhiker.com.au, on Apple Podcasts, on Podbean and Spotify. If you have the opportunity, please go through and give us a 5-star rating on your listening service of choice, and we'll read those out on the podcasts on a regular basis. That's all for me. Bye for now.
And bye from me.